Former Yorkshire cricketer Azeem Rafiq has told Sky Sports News he would have liked a parliamentary report released today on racism in cricket to recommend the government sets up an independent regulator for the sport. The report does not include such a recommendation. Here are the key findings of the report carried out by the Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. It ruled that racism in English cricket is deep-seated. MPs have recommended the ECB should develop a set of key indicators to measure their progress in tackling racism. If there isn't demonstrable progress in eradicating racism in the dressing rooms and stands, the report recommends the government should limit public money to the sport. The ECB should report to the DCMS 4 times a year, and the department will also invite Yorkshire and the ECB to give evidence on their progress early this year. Live to Westminster and our reporter James Cole. James, good afternoon. You spoke to Rafiq this morning. How disappointed did you find him that there was no independent regulator recommended in the report?
Hi Nick. Overall, he welcomes these recommendations in the report. He accepts that change needs to happen, and these are good, sound recommendations. But the one thing that's problematic is that of regulation. And what Rafiq's case showed is this conflict of interest in the ECB's 2 roles, both as a promoter of the game in England and Wales, but also a regulator of the game. And when these 2 things come together, that was the issue that meant for Rafiq, he didn't get his case heard. Yorkshire were allowed to investigate, not release his findings, and it just rolled on and on and on. And the ECB couldn't intervene because of their own structures of governance wouldn't allow them to do so. So before Christmas, Sports Minister Nigel Huddleston threatened independent regulation in cricket if the ECB didn't get its house in order. There are calls for an independent regulator in football, and now Rafiq believes cricket needs one too.
It feels like they've given the game a chance, but I actually feel like that if we're going to learn anything from the 2 years of my case, the one thing is very clear, that ECB can't be the regulators and the promoters of the game because they're conflicted. So for me, I think that's one tangible constitutional change that needs to happen as a matter of urgency, that there needs to be an independent regulator. So cases like mine or others are heard a lot sooner than 2 years.
Down the line, if we find that the ECB is not measuring up and is not dealing with these issues as it should do, we could go further. And we could recommend, for instance, that there is an independent regulator set up, which would effectively split up the ECB from its current role, which is part promoter and part regulator. And that itself is a very drastic action and is one that's being looked at obviously in football. But if they have not shown that they are dealing with this racism, then I think that is action that would be justified.
So that's one talking point, James, the independent regulator. What did Rafiq make when you spoke to him about the other findings and recommendations in the report?
Yeah, in particular, he welcomes this quarterly meeting between the ECB and the DCMS Select Committee, because back in November, the ECB published a 12-point action plan on diversity. Now, since then, we haven't heard very much about this. We've had an Ashes series. The focus has gone away from racism, and it's gone on to red ball cricket and the failure of the structure of red ball cricket in this country. And what would be very easy to happen now, after everything that Rafiq's been through and everything that came out just before Christmas, would be for this to fall into the shadows, into the darkness, and not forgotten about completely, but the spotlight not shone on it. Well, by meeting with MPs quarterly, every 3 months, it allows the DCMS committee to hold the ECB to account, and that, for Rafiq, is key.
I'm encouraged by the report. It shows that the committee has clearly taken the issue of institutional racism very seriously, a lot more seriously than the game has for a very long time. And I think that's shown in the 2 recommendations, especially the one where ECB are going to have to report to the committee on a quarterly basis, which means we can see whether there's any actions to the 12-point action plan. At the minute, there seems to be this sort of will to talk about red ball game and try and sort that out more than the racism in the game. And it's important that if they know they have to come in front of the committee and tell the committee what they've done, then they're going to have to make sure they're on it all along.
James, you spend a lot of time talking to people in cricket. Now this report is out. Does the game as a whole accept that it has to properly address these issues with racism, which it clearly hasn't done effectively enough in the past?
I think at the top, yes, but what you're talking about here is institutional racism, and that's about changing attitudes, educating people, not just at the top, but all the way down to grassroots, and you're also talking about a societal issue. And that's, for Rafiq, the problem. And what he found after he gave that evidence, that powerful evidence at the DCMS committee last year, was a backlash. People trying to discredit him, people trying to release stories into the media of things he'd done in the past, which he deeply regrets. But he found that that showed just how deep-rooted this is, and he also fears that people will try and put too much emphasis on Yorkshire and make it about a few bad eggs, and he's keen to emphasise going forward that this is institutional and attitudes need to change right the way through the game.
There needs to be more than just words. I feel like a lot of counties and the ECB want to throw the book at Yorkshire to deflect away from their own failings. Let's not beat around the bush. This is not just a Yorkshire problem, but I sense that the game still, and it's shown from actions, as Julian mentioned as well, a lot of the language that was used about me after my evidence shows that the game is still very much in denial and doesn't feel like it's done anything wrong. And that's scary after the last few months, to think that it's a bad few eggs and not actually an institutional problem.
In terms of Yorkshire, Rafiq welcomes the work done by Lord Patel, the new chairman, in the few months that he's been in charge. He also welcomes the appointment of Darren Gough as the new managing director. He believes Headingley should now be allowed to have Test cricket, international cricket this summer, but on the condition that Yorkshire Cricket Club continues to champion diversity.